I started writing as a kid. I used to draw. My father was an artist, and so I would draw my own little cartoons and write the stories. But I never had any formal training as an artist, so when I moved to California, I found that I was way, way outclassed. And so I stuck to the writing. But even as early as when I was 13 years old, I had a comic strip in our local newspaper that ran for a year. It was weekly, so it wasn't quite as big a grind, but still. So I had been writing for a long time, and I wrote shows in college, and that just led me to California. In fact, I moved here to either become a writer or an actor, and I still occasionally work as an actor, but I'm able to make a living as a writer, where I'm not able to make a living as an actor. I always loved animation, and my father, again being an artist, he loved animation, and so we would watch it together. And I don't know why the fascination with it. I just really enjoyed it, and I think the fact that he enjoyed it led me to enjoy it. And like I said, I wrote a comic strip, and I wrote comic book stories on my own before I ever came out here, and so animation was a natural leap. The way I got involved with the Transformers was that I had been working with Bryce Malick and Dick Robbins at Hanna-Barbera, and I was writing for them first on, I wrote specifically for them on the Little Rascals cartoons, and I did quite a few of those for Bryce and Dick, and then they left Hanna-Barbera and went over to Marvel, and they called me, and they actually, the first episode of the Transformers I did was the middle part of a 3-part episode. So that was kind of interesting, because I had to coordinate with the guy who was writing the first part and the guy who was writing the third part. Transformers was really my first action-adventure show. And I think it really comes down to, it's a Hollywood myth that a writer who writes comedy can't write drama, but it happens very often in this business that you get typecast. And again, I have to credit Bryce and Dick as trusting me, as knowing that I could handle it. The most exciting thing to me was I actually contributed a couple of things to the Transformers mythology, and the first is I created the character of Carly. And the second one is I was the first one to write an episode that took place on Cybertron in Desertion of the Dinobots. When they go to rescue the Dinobots and get the Cybertonium, I created that interior world of Cybertron, the tube system of transportation and that kind of thing. So I did feel like I made a contribution to it. Now, I'd say the writing of the episodes was pretty straightforward. It was pitch a story, get the story idea approved. The story would usually be maybe, sometimes we'd start with a springboard that would be just like a 2-sentence idea. Here's an area. Have you covered this area yet? And then we'd expand that into a premise, which might be a page. And then once that was approved, we'd go to full outline and then to script. And of course, there are approvals all along the way. From Sunbow had to approve, and the story editors had their input with notes. But it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's pretty much the way every other animated show I ever worked on ran. And as far as the amount of time, I don't remember. I don't remember being particularly rushed on the Transformers. But my guess would be probably about a week to do an outline and maybe 2 weeks to write a script, with extra days in there for revisions. Here's a big secret of the Transformers. The universe was huge, and it kept getting bigger. Every time I would go to do a new episode, they'd have new toys out, and so we'd have new characters. If I'm not mistaken, and I'm sure there are people who know this better than I do, but I think by the last episode that I worked on, which was episode 64, there were over 100 characters. And so there was a huge Bible of all the characters and their personalities and what weapons they had and what powers they had and who combined to form who. But here's the big secret. You would develop a story and figure out who would work, which characters would work in that story by what powers they had and what they could do. But the other important element was, once you chose a character, there was an actor who was doing that character's voice. Now, most of the actors on the Transformers doubled and tripled. They did 2 or 3 characters. So once you had that actor as a character, you could use his other characters in the story. And so you would design the story to fit the characters. They wanted to keep the actors down to as few as possible. So you couldn't have 24 characters in one episode. But you could have 24 characters in one episode if 3 were done by this actor, 3 were done by this actor, you know, so you could split it up that way. And a lot of the stories were designed around which character did what thing, who could shoot lead and who could shoot molten lava and who had a sound wave disruptor, and then which actors played them, and then you could build your story around the powers and the actors. I can't remember the specifics behind the introduction of Carly in terms of, I don't remember whether the story editors came to me and said, you know, it would be nice if we had a girl character in here, or if I just pitched the story and said, hey, I've got this idea for a girl character, can I put her in? But one way or the other, I think that was the idea behind it, was that it was this entire universe of male robots and boys, and I know I did feel that we needed a female character, but again, as I say, I don't remember whether they came to me and said, hey, see if you can come up with a female character, or whether I pitched the story and said, hey, can I put this female character in this story? But ultimately what I'm getting at is the idea behind it was that I think we felt we needed a female character. I think I had been listening to Carly Simon, and I think that's where I took the name Carly from. I just liked it and thought it fit. I bet people think it's because it was Autobots and there's Carly, but it wasn't. I don't think Hoist Goes to Hollywood was a personal story at all. I think it was strictly, there had been a lot of stories done already, and I pitched an idea and it just went. I don't think there's a better story behind it. It's a pretty typical cartoon story. It's been done 100 times, where the hero of the story becomes a stunt person. But in this case, I think it had that extra humorous twist of all the director wanted to do was crash the Autobots constantly. The interesting story about Desertion of the Dinobots is that it started out as a one-parter. And I wrote the entire outline, and Bryce Malick, the story editor, called me and he said, I have good news and bad news. He said, the good news is they want to turn this into a 2-parter. The bad news is, obviously, you have to redo the outline because now you have to spread the story over the 2 parts. And that was where the idea of, because they liked the idea so much of going to Cybertron, they felt there was enough material there to, these were the executives at Sunbow, felt that there was enough story there to turn it into a 2-parter. So I was happy to oblige. I think in this case, it wasn't that big of a challenge to turn it into a 2-parter because there was so much material. I was able to just develop everything much more and develop the characters more and develop the, certainly we got to spend all that time on Cybertron that we wouldn't have been able to do if it had been a 1-parter. I don't even remember, I don't remember how the 1-parter played out, whether we even went to Cybertron. The only thing we had seen of Cybertron was the entrance from the space bridge, and other than that, it was completely wide open. So it was quite a bit of fun to do that episode and figure out what this planet was going to look like. Well, if I had to choose a favorite character, I guess it seems to me that I used Bumblebee quite a bit, and I'm not sure the reason why, other than it seemed like Bumblebee and Spike had a special relationship. And so if I had to choose one, I guess I would say Bumblebee. In the villains, Starscream was definitely the most fun to write for and the most fun to beat up. One thing interesting about the Transformers was I loved beating them up and breaking them into pieces and crashing them around. I think one of the things that interested me about the Transformers was the technology of it. I've always been sort of interested in technology and the newest computer and the newest gadget, and jumping on board early on CDs from vinyl, and so the idea of the technology and creating the technology really interested me in much the same way that I enjoyed writing Jetsons comic books, because you could make up all this technology, this fantastic technology that doesn't exist. And if you look at a couple of my episodes, I mean, particularly the Immobilizer and Bot, it's creating new technology that wasn't even part of the universe. Since the Transformers, I've worked on a lot of things, everything from Addams Family to Back to the Future to Tiny Toon Adventures, Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, and currently a show I worked on, which is actually, this is another departure for me into preschool. We did a show called Baby Looney Tunes that is running on the WB and the Cartoon Network. And now I'm currently working on Kim Possible for the Disney Channel, which is kind of back to action-adventure comedy. I don't know how to describe it. It's not, she goes against supervillains, but she's not a superhero. She's just an ordinary girl. She's a cheerleader in high school. And she put up a website that said, "I can do anything." And she meant things like babysitting. But then she would get these calls to rescue people from supervillains, and so she became this hero. I'll tell you what I noticed watching these episodes again recently, because I hadn't seen them in a long time. They really hold up very well. I'm amazed, for shows that were made in the mid-'80s, the pace is incredibly quick. A lot of short scenes and quick cutting, and they're packed. They're really packed. A lot of stuff happens in these episodes, and I was really impressed by that, by watching them now, that they hold up as well as they do. And so, as I said, I was very surprised and pleased that they seem to have such a following, and I can see why, because I think in terms of storytelling and the action packed into these half hours, they do hold up very well.